Little girl looks the billionaire in the eye and says loudly, "You're my dad." Everyone is in shock. The cold October wind swept dry leaves across the sidewalk as Matthew Reynolds parked his black BMW in front of the mirrored glass building. Reynolds Tech. The golden letters shone in the morning sun. 15 years building that empire. 15 years turning lines of code into millions of dollars. Matthew checked his Rolex 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes before the meeting with the Japanese investors. The opportunity he had been waiting for months. The contracts inside the leather briefcase could double the company's revenue in the next 2 years. He adjusted his Italian tie, grabbed the briefcase from the passenger seat and got out of the car. The morning air was crisp, full of the promise of a productive day. Another day building the empire that had become his entire life. It was then that a child's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You abandoned Mommy." Matthew froze on the sidewalk. A small girl had stepped out from behind a tree and was standing right in front of him. She must have been about 6 years old. Light blonde hair in 2 messy braids, blue eyes that shone with a disturbing intensity. She wore a worn-out pink coat that looked too big for her frail body. She had her fists clenched by her sides and was staring at him with a courage that didn't match her age. "I was born without you," she yelled, her voice echoing down the busy street. The words struck Matthew like lightning. The briefcase slipped from his hands and fell to the ground with a dull thud, the contract scattering across the sidewalk. People on the street stopped to look, some pulling out their phones to film. "No, this can't be," he exclaimed, taking a step back, stumbling slightly. But even as he denied it, Matthew couldn't take his eyes off the girl. Something about her was familiar, disturbingly familiar, the golden blonde hair, the blue eyes that seemed to look right into his soul. The delicate shape of her face, that small but determined chin. It was like looking at a ghost he couldn't identify, but that stirred something deep in his memory. Who are you?" he stammered, still in shock. "Ruby," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Ruby Monroe." Monroe. The last name echoed in Matthew's mind like a distant bell. Why did it sound familiar? Did he know a Monroe? Where is your mother?" he asked, trying to regain control of the situation. "Working," Ruby answered, without taking her eyes off him. "She's always working a lot, since I was a baby." Matthew looked around, searching for a responsible adult. "You shouldn't be here alone." "That's dangerous for a child." "I'm not a child," Ruby interrupted, stomping her foot on the ground. "I'm 6 years old, and I can take care of myself." 6 years old. The age ricocheted in Matthew's mind. Why did that number seem important? "Ruby, I don't understand what you mean," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Why are you saying these things?" "I don't know your mother." Ruby's blue eyes narrowed. "Yes, you do, Katie Monroe. She has a picture of you, an old picture." Katie Monroe. The name hit Matthew like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, his legs felt weak. The girl's familiar face made sense. Those blue eyes, that blonde hair, that stubborn way of speaking. She was just like Katie, exactly like Katie Monroe. Katie," he murmured, more to himself than to Ruby. "You remember her now?" Ruby asked, a mix of satisfaction and sadness in her voice. "Mommy said you two dated. She said you left and never came back." Matthew felt the world spinning around him. Katie Monroe, of course. How could he have forgotten? How could he have buried it so deep in his memory? But it still didn't make sense. Katie and him. They broke up. She moved away. It was all amicable. There was no abandonment. There was no... "Ruby, your mother and I. We broke up. It happens. But I never abandoned her." Ruby shook her head vehemently. "Liar! You left when you found out she was going to have a baby." The ground disappeared from under Matthew's feet. "A baby? What baby?" "Katie was pregnant. I didn't know about any baby," he said, his voice coming out as a whisper. Ruby looked at him with a confused expression. "How did you not know? You're my dad." The words exploded in Matthew's mind like fireworks. "Dad," she said, "Dad." He looked at Ruby with new eyes. Her blonde hair was just like his when he was a child. Her blue eyes were identical to the ones he saw in the mirror every day. The shape of her face, the determined chin, even the way she frowned when she was confused. It was him. It was a female version of him. My God. He had a daughter. Ruby. Matthew tried to get closer, but his legs weren't responding properly. "Ruby, I really didn't know." "Liar," she shouted, tears starting to form in her blue eyes. "Mommy said she told you. She said you didn't want to know." Matthew shook his head desperately. No. Katie never told me anything about..." But even as he spoke, a vague memory began to form in his mind. Katie being nervous. Katie wanting to talk about something important. Katie trying to call several times before he changed his number. He was always too busy to answer. Always had a meeting, a project, something more important. "She tried to tell you," Ruby said, as if she could read his thoughts. "But you never had time. You never wanted to listen." The memories came back like an avalanche. Katie showing up at the company. Him asking his secretary to say he was in a meeting. Katie sending texts he never answered. Katie calling until he changed his phone number. Good God. Katie had tried to tell him about the pregnancy, and he had run away without even knowing what he was running from. "Ruby, He knelt on the sidewalk, getting to her level. "I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know about you." "Now you know," she said, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her coat. "Are you going to leave again now?" The question pierced Matthew's heart. No, I'm not leaving." Ruby studied him for a long moment. "Mommy said you would say that men always make promises they can't keep." Before Matthew could answer, Ruby took a step back. "Bye," she said, just like that. "Ruby, wait." Matthew stood up quickly, but she was already walking away. "Ruby, please, let me explain." But Ruby didn't stop. She walked down the sidewalk with small but determined steps, her braids swinging. She turned the corner and disappeared into the crowd. Matthew stood frozen in the middle of the sidewalk, surrounded by the contracts scattered on the ground. The onlookers began to disperse, whispering among themselves. Someone was still filming with their phone. He had a daughter he never knew existed, a daughter who grew up thinking her father had abandoned her. "Mr. Reynolds?" The voice of the building's doorman brought him partially back to reality. "Is everything all right? The papers?" Matthew looked down. The million-dollar contracts were being trampled by hurried pedestrians, documents that represented months of work, opportunities that could transform the company. None of it mattered now. "The Japanese investors have arrived, sir. They're waiting in the conference room." Japanese investors, meeting. The words seemed to come from another planet, from a world where he was just a successful CEO, not a father who abandoned a daughter without even knowing it. "Cancel it," he said, bending down to gather the damp papers. "Excuse me." "Cancel the meeting. Family emergency." The doorman looked confused, but Matthew didn't care. He walked into the building carrying the battered briefcase, past the elevators, and ran up the stairs. He needed to be alone. He needed to understand what had just happened. On the 15th floor, he locked himself in his office and collapsed into his chair. He closed his eyes and forced his mind to go back in time. 7 years ago, Katie Monroe. Now that Ruby had said the name, the memories came rushing back. How could he have forgotten? How could he have buried it so completely in his memory? Katie, blonde hair that shone in the sun, green eyes that always seemed to be smiling, a laugh that could light up any room. She was studying English literature at the university. He was studying computer science. They were completely different. She was a dreamer, passionate about poetry and novels. He was practical, focused on code and algorithms. But for some reason, they worked together for almost 2 years. Matthew remembered Sundays in her apartment. Katie reading aloud while he worked on his laptop. The walks in the park discussing everything and nothing. The nights watching old movies she loved and he pretended to like. It was a strange period in his life, the only period when he wasn't obsessively focused on the future, on his career, on success. Katie made him live in the present. But then the opportunity came. The idea for Reynolds Tech, the project that could turn him from a student into an entrepreneur. Matthew started working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Katie tried to be understanding at first. She would bring him food when he forgot to eat. She would massage his shoulders when he was hunched over the computer for hours. She waited patiently when he cancelled dates because of work. But Matthew was consumed by the vision of the future. Every line of code was a step towards a fortune. Every sleepless night was an investment in the empire he would build. Katie started to complain that he no longer had time for her, that the relationship was on the back burner, that she felt lonely even when they were together. Matthew thought she was being dramatic. It was a phase, he said. When the company took off, he would have plenty of time for a relationship. But Katie wasn't convinced. "Sometimes I feel like you see me as an obstacle," she said in one of their last conversations. "Like something that's getting in the way of your plans." "That's ridiculous," Matthew replied, not even looking up from the screen. "You know I love you." Loving and prioritizing are different things, Matt. They started to fight more often. Katie wanted attention, time, presence. Matthew wanted understanding, patience, space to work. The tension grew until it exploded in a nasty argument. Matthew couldn't even remember exactly what it was about anymore. Something about him missing her sister's birthday because of a meeting. "You chose," Katie said, tears running down her face. "You chose this company over us." "This is temporary," Matthew retorted. "And when everything works out, we'll have a better life." "What if I don't want to wait until you decide our life can begin?" That's when it all fell apart. Katie said she needed a break. Matthew said if that was the case, maybe it was better for them to break up for good. They were words spoken in anger, in the heat of the moment. Matthew thought Katie would come around in a few days, that she would realize she was being irrational, but she didn't come back. She tried calling several times in the first few days. Matthew was always busy, always had something more urgent. He planned to return her calls later, when he finished the project, when he had more time. Katie showed up at the company a few times. The secretary always said he was in a meeting, as Matthew had asked. It wasn't a lie, he really did live in meetings, but he also made no effort to see her. He was hurt. His pride was wounded. If Katie couldn't understand the importance of what he was building, if she couldn't support him at the most crucial moment of his career, maybe she wasn't the right person after all. After a few weeks, the calls stopped. Katie stopped showing up at the company. Matthew heard from mutual friends that she had dropped out of her course and moved out of town. He felt vindicated at the time. See how dramatic she was, he thought. At the first sign of trouble, she ran. Reynolds Tech took off in the following months. Matthew worked like a man possessed, channeling all the energy he once dedicated to their relationship into the company. His success was meteoric. By 28, he was a millionaire. By 30, a multimillionaire. He bought a mansion in the best neighborhood, imported cars, designer clothes. He became the successful young entrepreneur he had always dreamed of being. He dated a few women over the years, but nothing serious. He always said he didn't have time for relationships, that he was focused on his career. The truth was, no one made him feel the way Katie did. No one had her smile, her way of seeing beauty in simple things, the way she made him laugh even on the toughest days. But Matthew buried those memories. Katie Monroe became the past, a phase of his youth that he had overcome. He had made the right choice, focusing on his career instead of getting distracted by relationships, until today. Until Ruby appeared in front of his company and blew his version of the facts to pieces. Katie had tried to tell him about the pregnancy, the calls he ignored, the visits he avoided. She was trying to tell him she was expecting his child, and he had run away without even knowing what he was running from. While Katie faced the pregnancy alone, He was celebrating the company's first contract. While she was giving birth to Ruby, he was in a presentation for investors. While she was waking up in the middle of the night to breastfeed, he was working until dawn to close more deals. Ruby grew up without a father because he was too cowardly to answer a phone call. The pain in his chest was almost unbearable. Matthew got up and went to the window, looking down at the street where Ruby had disappeared. His daughter. He had a 6-year-old daughter who grew up thinking her father didn't want her, that she was abandoned before she was even born. And the worst part, Ruby was right. Not technically, he really didn't know about the pregnancy, but morally, spiritually, she was right. He had abandoned Katie at the moment she needed him most. He had chosen professional success over love. He had been so obsessed with the future that he completely missed the present. Matthew picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed his assistant. "Sarah, cancel all my appointments for today, for the whole week, if necessary." "Sir, but you have important presentations. Cancel everything and get me information on Katie Monroe. Address, phone number, where she works, everything you can find." "Katie Monroe, may I ask why?" Matthew hesitated. How could he explain that he had just discovered he was a father, that a lifetime of wrong choices was crumbling before his eyes? "It's about my daughter," he finally said. The words sounded strange coming out of his mouth. My daughter. Ruby was his daughter, and he was going to do everything possible not to be the coward he was 7 years ago, even if it was too late, even if she could never forgive him, even if Katie hated him for the rest of her life. He was going to try to be the father Ruby deserved, the father he should have been from the start. Matthew parked his BMW 2 blocks from 247 Maple Street and sat in the car for 15 minutes, trying to find the courage. His hands were sweating on the leather steering wheel as he mentally rehearsed what he would say when Katie opened the door. For 2 days since meeting Ruby, he had cancelled all his appointments and obsessively researched Katie Monroe. He found out she worked as a librarian at the local elementary school, that she never married, that she was raising Ruby alone in a small apartment in a middle-class neighborhood. He also discovered, through old university classmates, that Katie had tried to contact him for months after their breakup. Ignored calls, refused visits to the company, unanswered messages. It all made sense now. She was trying to tell him about Ruby. The address Sarah had found led him to a 3-story apartment building, well-maintained but clearly modest, very different from the mansion where he lived alone. Matthew took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked the 2 blocks as if he were heading to an execution. Each step brought him closer to a confrontation he had avoided for 7 years. The building had a simple intercom at the entrance. Matthew found the name K. Monroe, apt to be, and hesitated with his finger over the button. On the other side of that door was the woman he had loved and abandoned, the woman who raised his daughter alone while he accumulated millions. He pressed the button. "Yes?" Katie's voice through the intercom made Matthew's heart race. Even distorted by the old device, it was still the voice he remembered. More mature, perhaps, but unmistakably hers. "Katie, it's me, Matthew." Silence on the other end. Matthew could imagine her freezing, trying to process what she had just heard. "Matthew Reynolds?" Her voice was tense. "Yes, I need to talk to you." Another long silence. Matthew held his breath, prepared to be refused, to be sent away. "Second floor," she finally said, and the door buzzed open. Matthew went up the stairs on trembling legs. The second-floor hallway was narrow but clean, with faded blue carpet and old light fixtures. The door to apartment 2B was slightly ajar. He knocked softly and pushed the door open. Katie was standing in the small living room, about 10 feet from the entrance. Matthew felt the air leave his lungs. She was thinner than he remembered, but still beautiful. Her blonde hair was shorter, cut in an elegant bob that framed her face. She wore jeans and a green sweater that highlighted her eyes. There were small lines around her green eyes, lines that weren't there 7 years ago. Wrinkles from worry, from sleepless nights, from raising a daughter alone. "Hello, Katie," Matthew said, his voice coming out hoarse. "Bon Matthew." She didn't come closer, didn't smile, didn't show any emotion other than a tired caution. "It took you long enough." The words were like a slap. Matthew closed the door behind him and stood there, unsure if he could come in further. "You can sit," Katie said, gesturing to a small beige sofa. "Guys, want some coffee?" "No, thank you." Matthew sat on the edge of the sofa, looking around the apartment. It was small but cozy. There were children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, books scattered on the coffee table, a pink blanket folded on an armchair, signs of Ruby everywhere. Katie sat in the armchair, keeping her distance. She crossed her arms and studied him with those green eyes he knew so well. "Ruby came to see me," Matthew said, breaking the silence. "I know. She told me." "Katie, He paused, swallowed hard, tried to organize his thoughts. "I didn't know about Ruby. You tried to tell me and I was an idiot." Katie said nothing, just kept looking at him with that neutral expression that was worse than anger. "I was immature," Matthew continued, the words tumbling out. "I asked you to get rid of it. I was a coward. I ran. But I'm here now." Katie let out a long sigh. "You should have been here 7 years ago." Her voice was calm, no shouting, no hysteria. But the pain was there, raw and deep. 7 years of accumulated pain in a simple sentence. "I know," Matthew said. "I know I'm late. I know I have no right to show up here after everything. But Ruby, she's my daughter." "Now she's your daughter?" Katie asked, and for the first time there was a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Where were you when she was born?" "When she had colic and I spent 3 nights without sleep. When she took her first steps and I had no one to share the joy with." Matthew lowered his head. "I was building an empire, thinking I was doing the right thing." "For whom?" "For me. Only for me." The admission came out like a whisper. I thought you'd be fine. That you would move on, find someone else." Katie laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "Move on?" "Matthew, I was 22, pregnant, and the father of my baby had changed his phone number so he wouldn't have to talk to me. How was I supposed to move on?" The words were like daggers. Matthew forced himself to look at her. "You tried to tell me. I tried for months. You were always busy, always had something more important. Your secretary must have paid for college with all the excuses she made up. Katie, if I had known, you would have known if you had answered one call, if you had met with me once, if you had given 5 minutes of your millionaire schedule to the woman you claimed to love." Matthew closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every word. "You're right, about everything. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance. But Ruby deserves a father." Katie got up and went to the window, turning her back to him. "She grew up just fine without a father. She's a strong, smart, independent girl. She's amazing. But still what?" Katie turned to face him. "You think you can show up now with your expensive car and your late guilt and everything will be okay? That Ruby will run into your arms and you'll live happily ever after?" "No," Matthew said. "I know that's not how it works. I know she might never forgive me, that you might never forgive me. But I have to try. I have to at least try to be the father she deserves." Katie returned to the armchair, but didn't sit. She stood, her arms still crossed. "She has questions," she said finally, "about you, about why you weren't here. I always tried to protect her. Not to speak ill of you, but she's smart. She knows something doesn't add up." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that you left before she was born, that I tried to find you, but you didn't want to be found, that it's not her fault." Matthew felt a sharp pain in his chest. "Ruby thinks I didn't want her." "You didn't. Or at least not enough to stay." "I was scared," Matthew admitted, "terrified. I was a stupid kid who thought financial success was more important than family." "And now?" Matthew looked around the small apartment, saw Ruby's drawings on the fridge, the pink blanket where she probably curled up to watch TV. He thought of the brave little girl who had the courage to find him, and tell him truths he needed to hear. Now I know I was wrong, completely wrong. Katie was silent for a long moment, studying his face. She has questions, she repeated finally, and I can't stop her from looking for answers, but Matthew... She looked him directly in the eyes. So if you're going to be a part of her life, you have to be all in. You can't show up when it's convenient and disappear when it gets tough. I understand. She's been abandoned once. I won't let it happen again. I won't abandon her, Matthew said. Never again. Katie studied him for another moment, then sighed. Ruby will be home from school in an hour. You can wait for her here if you want. Matthew nodded, grateful for any opportunity. Thank you. Katie went to the kitchen to make coffee, leaving Matthew alone in the living room. He got up and went to look at the drawings on the fridge. There were several, houses with chimneys, colorful flowers, smiling animals. In a corner, a drawing that made his heart stop. It was a family, a woman with blonde hair, a smaller girl also blonde, and an empty space next to them, as if someone was missing. She drew that last year, Katie said, coming back with 2 cups of coffee. When the teacher asked them to draw their family, Matthew touched the paper carefully. How there's a space for the father she never knew. The front door opened at that moment, and Ruby came in carrying a pink backpack. She stopped when she saw Matthew, her blue eyes widening. You came, she said, and Matthew couldn't tell if she was surprised, happy, or scared. Hi, Ruby. Ruby looked at Katie, as if asking for permission. Katie nodded slightly. Why did you come? Ruby asked, taking off her backpack and dropping it on the floor. Because you were right, Matthew said, crouching down to her level. I abandoned you both, and that was wrong. Ruby frowned. Are you going to abandon me like you did with Mommy? The question pierced Matthew's heart. I don't know how to be a dad, he said honestly. Oh, but I want to learn. Ruby studied him for a long moment, those blue eyes identical to his analyzing every word. Then start, she said finally. In the days that followed, Matthew tried to do just that. Start. He found out that Ruby attended the same school where Katie worked, just 15 minutes from Reynolds Tech. Matthew rearranged his schedule so he could pick her up every day at 3 in the afternoon. The first day, Ruby was surprised to see him waiting at the school gate. The second, she was expecting him. The third, she waved when she saw him. Matthew learned that Ruby liked to sit in the left back seat of the car, that she preferred low music on the radio, that sometimes she wanted to talk about her day at school, but other times she preferred to be quiet, looking out the window. He bought a sketchbook and colored pencils to keep in the car. Ruby started drawing during the ride when she didn't feel like talking. Do you like stories? Matthew asked one day after a week of picking her up. Ruby nodded. Mommy always reads to me before bed. What kind of stories? Princesses? Talking animals? Adventures? Matthew stopped at a red light and looked at her in the rearview mirror. Can I tell you a story tomorrow? Ruby considered the offer seriously. Do you know good stories? I can learn. Okay. Matthew spent the night researching children's stories on the internet, choosing one about a brave girl who saves a kingdom. The next day, he told the story during the drive, watching Ruby in the rearview mirror. She listened in silence, but he could see she was paying attention. Did you like it? He asked when he finished. It was good, Ruby said. Will you tell another one tomorrow? Of course. They weren't close yet. Ruby didn't call him Dad, rarely asked personal questions, and maintained a polite but noticeable distance. But something was changing. Something small and fragile was growing between them. Matthew learned that Ruby liked to draw in silence, that she became thoughtful when it rained, that she always checked if her seatbelt was tight before he started the car. Small details he was collecting like treasures. She's happier, Katie commented one afternoon when Matthew brought Ruby back home. More complete. Matthew nodded, not trusting his own voice. He felt different too, more complete, in a way that all the financial success in the world had never provided. It was just the beginning. They were still practically strangers, still learning to navigate this new dynamic. But for the first time in 7 years, Matthew felt like he was in the right place. Ruby deserved a father, and he was going to do everything he could to deserve to be that man, even if it took the rest of his life to get there. 2 weeks had passed since Matthew started picking Ruby up from school. The routine was settling in. He would arrive at 3 o'clock sharp. Ruby would run out when she saw him at the gate, sit in the left back seat, and sometimes ask for a story. Other times prefer to draw in silence. Matthew was learning to read her cues. When Ruby was too quiet, it meant she'd had a tough day at school. When she swung her legs in her seat, she was excited to tell him something. When she asked for music on the radio, she wanted him to sing along. Even though he sang badly, she would laugh. Little things, details he was collecting like a treasure. But the more time he spent with Ruby, the more Matthew realized what she and Katie didn't have. The small apartment, the simple clothes, Katie's old car that sometimes wouldn't start. Ruby never complained, never asked for anything, but Matthew noticed. Her backpack was worn out. Her sneakers had scuff marks. When she drew in the car, she always used the same worn-out colored pencils. Matthew had millions in the bank. He could give Ruby and Katie a completely different life. Better, more comfortable. It was a Friday when he finally decided to bring up the subject. After dropping Ruby off at home, he asked to speak with Katie. "Can I come in?" he asked through the intercom. "Of course." Katie opened the door with a cautious expression already on her face. She knew Matthew well enough to tell when he had something on his mind. "Coffee," she offered, as always. "Please." They sat at the small kitchen table. Ruby was in her room doing homework. Matthew could hear the sound of a pencil on paper, the sounds of a concentrating child. "Katie," he began, turning the cup between his hands, "I've been thinking about some things." "What kind of things?" Matthew took a deep breath. "About Ruby, about what she needs, what you both need." Katie leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Go on." "I know you two are doing fine," Matthew said quickly. "Ruby is an amazing girl, and that's thanks to you, but I have the means to help. To give her things that—" "What things?" Katie's voice was controlled, but he could feel the tension. Matthew swallowed hard. "A better school. Private, with more resources, specialized teachers. Ruby is very smart. She deserves the best opportunities." Katie said nothing, just continued to look at him. "And a health plan," Matthew continued. "The best one there is, for both of you. And I could help with other things. The rent, bills, whatever you need." The silence in the kitchen grew heavy. Matthew could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, the noises from the building around them, Ruby writing in her room. "Are you finished?" Katie finally asked. Katie, I just want—" "You want what, Matthew?" She leaned forward, her green eyes focused on him. "You want to do what?" Matthew hesitated. "I want to help." "Help who?" "Ruby. She's my daughter. I should—" "You should what?" Katie interrupted. "You should have been here when I had to work 2 jobs to pay the rent. You should have helped when Ruby had pneumonia, and I spent 5 sleepless nights in the hospital. You should have shared the expenses of the last 6 years with me." Matthew lowered his head. I know I'm late, but now you can buy your clear conscience." The words were like a slap. Matthew looked up, surprised by the harshness in Katie's voice. "That's not it," he said. "I genuinely want Ruby to have the best." "Ruby has the best," Katie replied. "She has a mother who never gave up on her. She has love, care, attention. She has dignity. But she also deserves opportunities." "What opportunities?" Katie stood up, starting to pace the small kitchen. "Nush, you think a private school will make her smarter than she already is, that an expensive health plan will love her more than I do, that your money will erase 6 years of absence." Matthew felt small in his chair. "I just thought—" "You thought you could show up here and solve everything with money, like you always do." Katie stopped pacing and faced him. "We managed just fine without you, Matthew. Ruby grew up strong, independent, loving, without your help, without your money. But now I can offer more. Why? Katie sat down again, but remained tense. Why do you want to do this? For Ruby or for you? The question caught Matthew off guard. What do you mean? Do you want to give her these things because she needs them? Or because you need to feel better about missing the first 6 years of her life? Matthew opened his mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Katie had hit the nail on the head. If you do something, Katie continued, her voice lower now, do it for her, not to make yourself feel better. They sat in silence for a moment. Matthew could hear Ruby moving around in her room, probably finishing her homework. I don't want your money, Katie said finally. I never did. I wanted you, your support, your presence, your love. And now, Katie sighed, now I want you to be Ruby's father. For real. Not the father who buys expensive things to make up for being absent, the father who is present. I'm trying. I know, and you're doing well. Ruby likes you. She gets excited on the days you pick her up. That's worth more than any private school. Matthew turned his coffee cup again, processing Katie's words. But she deserves to have everything. She deserves to have a father, Katie interrupted. Not a walking bank. The bedroom door opened, and Ruby appeared in the kitchen, carrying her homework notebook. I'm done, she announced. Mommy, can I watch a little bit of TV? Of course, sweetie. Ruby noticed Matthew at the table. Hi. Are you staying for dinner? Matthew looked at Katie, who shook her head almost imperceptibly. Not this time. Not today, Ruby. I just came to talk to your mom. Okay. Ruby didn't seem disappointed. Are you picking me up from school tomorrow? I am. Cool. Can I tell you how gym class was? You can. Ruby smiled and went to the living room to turn on the TV. Matthew and Katie were alone in the kitchen again. Did you see that? Katie asked quietly. What? She didn't ask for anything. Not a toy, not candy, not anything. She just wants you to be there tomorrow. Matthew felt a tightness in his chest. She's special. She is. And you know why? Katie leaned forward. Because I taught her that people's value isn't in what they can give, but in who they are. Ruby doesn't love you for your money, Matthew. She doesn't even know you have money. But she could have a better life. She has a good life. It may not be luxurious, but it's full of love. It's honest. It's ours. Katie stood up and went to the sink, turning her back to Matthew. If you really want to help, keep picking her up from school, keep telling her stories, keep being present. That's what she needs from you. And if one day you two need something, for real, Katie turned to face him, then we'll talk. But as a family, not as a guilty favor. Matthew nodded slowly. He had spent his entire life solving problems with money, buying solutions, buying comfort, even buying relationships. But with Ruby and Katie, money meant nothing. What mattered was presence, consistency, love. I get it, he said, standing up. Do you really? I get that I have a lot to learn about being a father, about being part of a family. Katie nodded. It's a good start. Matthew walked to the door, but stopped before leaving. Katie, thank you. For what? For protecting her, for protecting both of you, for not letting me screw this up too. Katie gave a small smile, the first genuine smile she had given him since he reappeared in their lives. Ruby needs a father who values her for who she is, not for what he can give her. Can you be that man? Matthew looked into the living room, where Ruby was lying on the floor watching cartoons, completely absorbed in the TV. She didn't need a private school or an expensive health plan to be perfect. She already was. I'll learn, he said. And for the first time since Ruby appeared in his life, Matthew felt he was on the right path. Not because he had money to offer, but because he had love to give. It was a start. Matthew looked at the clock on the car's dashboard. 2:58 p.m. 2 minutes until Ruby got out of school. Over the last 3 weeks, he had become religiously punctual. He always arrived 5 minutes early, waited at the gate, and waved when he saw Ruby running towards him. Today was different. Today he had rushed out of an important meeting with investors from South Korea, leaving Sarah to finish the presentation. The Koreans hadn't liked it. Matthew knew he would lose at least 2 million in contracts, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Ruby was waiting. The bell rang, and the children started to come out. Matthew searched for Ruby's blonde hair, for the coat she always wore. When he saw her, he waved as he always did, but Ruby didn't run to him. She walked slowly, her head down, dragging her backpack. "Hi," she said when she reached the car, her voice lower than usual. "Hi, Princess. Is everything okay?" Ruby nodded, but Matthew could see she wasn't okay. She sat in the left back seat as always, but she was too quiet. "Want to tell me about your day?" Matthew asked, starting the car. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Matthew tried to think of what to do. In the past weeks, he had learned that Ruby sometimes needed space, but this time felt different. It seemed like she was truly sad. "Ruby," he said at a red light, looking in the rearview mirror. "Did something happen at school?" Ruby finally looked up. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying. "The teacher asked me to read out loud," she said quietly. "And then, I made a mistake. I messed up my own name." Matthew frowned. "What do you mean?" Ruby pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her backpack. "It was an essay on my family." In a child's still uncertain handwriting, she had written about her mother, about how she liked to draw, about the books Katie read to her. And at the end, where her name should have been, there was a smudge. Ruby had tried to write Ruby several times, erasing and rewriting. "I always mess up the RI," she said, her voice trembling. "Everyone else in the class can write their name right except me." Matthew's heart ached. He parked the car in front of a small park and turned to look at Ruby. "Can I see?" Ruby handed him the paper. Matthew looked at the whole essay. The words about Katie, about how she makes the best rice with scrambled eggs in the world, about how they watched movies on the left side of the sofa because it's warmer. "Ruby," he said carefully, "you wrote beautiful things here, about your mum, about the two of you. But I messed up my name. The letter R is really tricky." "Want to know a secret?" Ruby looked up, curious despite her sadness. "When I was little, I hated writing my name too. You know why? Why? Because Matthew has 2 T's. I always forgot to put both of them. I would write Matthew. My teacher would get mad." Ruby gave a small smile. "Really? Really? And you know what my mom used to do?" "What?" Matthew didn't know why he was making up this story. His mother had never done anything like it. But looking at Ruby, he knew exactly what a caring mother would do. She would take a big piece of paper and write my name in huge letters. Then she would let me trace each letter with my finger, as many times as I wanted, until I memorized it. Ruby's spirits lifted. "Does that work?" "Want to try?" They got out of the car and sat on a park bench. Matthew took a clean sheet of paper from the briefcase he always carried and wrote Ruby in large, clear letters. "Now trace it with your finger," he said, holding Ruby's small hand and guiding it over the letters. R, U, B. They did this several times. Ruby laughed when Matthew exaggerated the pronunciation of the R, making a funny sound. "Now you try to write it," Matthew said. Ruby carefully picked up the pencil and wrote slowly. The R came out crooked, but it was there. "Look," she exclaimed. "I did it." "You sure did." "Want to do it again?" They stayed at the park for 40 minutes, Ruby practicing writing her name. Matthew cancelled a conference call, ignored 3 urgent calls, and focused entirely on teaching his daughter to write the 4 letters that defined her. When they arrived at Katie's apartment, Ruby was excited again. "Mommy, Mommy, look what I learned." Katie appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on an apron. "What is it, sweetie?" "I know how to write my name right. Look." Ruby ran to the table and wrote Ruby on a piece of paper. It wasn't perfect, but it was legible. "That's beautiful," Katie said, but Matthew could see the question in her eyes. Ruby had left school sad. "And the teacher asked her to read her essay out loud," Matthew explained quietly. "She was embarrassed because she messed up her name." Katie nodded, understanding immediately. "Honey," she said to Ruby, "why don't you show Daddy your favorite color, the one you told me about yesterday?" Ruby ran to her room and came back with a box of colored pencils. She pulled out a light purple pencil. "It's lavender," she told Matthew. "It's purple that smells like flowers." Matthew smiled. "Purple that smells like flowers? That's beautiful. Mommy has a perfume that's this color. Sometimes she lets me wear a little bit." "Really?" Ruby nodded. "And you know what else? I'm hungry." "Can I have rice with scrambled eggs?" Katie laughed. "You sure can. Want to help make it?" "Can Daddy stay for dinner?" Ruby asked, looking between Katie and Matthew. Matthew looked at Katie, waiting for her answer. "He can," Katie said after a moment. "If he wants to." "I'd love to." Matthew watched Ruby help Katie in the kitchen. She insisted on cracking the eggs herself, even making a small mess. When Katie cut the tomatoes, Ruby arranged the pieces in perfect rows on the plate. "It looks prettier this way," she explained to Matthew. During dinner, Ruby talked about school, about a friend who had lost a tooth, about the drawing she was making for Mother's Day. "It's a secret," she said, covering her mouth with her hand, "but it's the color lavender." After dinner, Katie said it was time for Ruby's bath. "Can I take a bath after the story?" Ruby asked. "What story?" "Daddy always tells a story in the car. He didn't today because I was sad, so can he tell one here?" Katie looked at Matthew. "If he knows any—" "I know several," Matthew said. Ruby ran to the living room and threw herself onto the sofa, but she didn't sit in the middle. She went straight to the left side, curling up against the armrest. "It's warmer here," she explained when she saw Matthew watching. Matthew sat next to her, not too close, respecting her space. He began to tell a story about a brave girl who knew how to write her name better than anyone in the kingdom. Ruby laughed at the funny parts, asked questions about the characters, and asked him to repeat the part where the girl in the story taught other children how to write. "Talk quieter," she asked in the middle of the story. "It's nicer to listen to that way." Matthew lowered his voice, speaking almost in a whisper. Ruby snuggled deeper into the sofa, her eyes shining. Katie was in the kitchen washing dishes, but Matthew knew she was listening. Every now and then, he would hear the sound of a plate being placed in the drying rack more slowly, as if she wanted to make less noise so as not to interrupt. When the story was over, Ruby let out a satisfied sigh. "That was a good one," she said. "Dad, would you tell another one tomorrow?" "If you want." "I do." Ruby went to take her bath, and Matthew stayed in the living room, looking at her drawings scattered on the coffee table. There were several purple ones. Her lavender color appeared in flowers, in princess dresses, in butterflies. Katie came back from the kitchen and sat in the armchair. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For staying at the park with her, for helping with her name, for not trying to solve the problem by buying something expensive." Matthew laughed softly. "I actually thought about it. I thought maybe I could hire a calligraphy tutor or something." "And why didn't you?" Matthew looked toward the hallway where Ruby was brushing her teeth, humming softly. "Because I realized she didn't need a tutor. She needed someone who had the patience to sit with her and teach, someone who cared more about her than about the perfection of her handwriting." Katie nodded. "She's different, you know." "How so?" "Lighter, more open. Before, when she got sad at school, it would take her hours to tell me what happened. Today, she told you in the car." Matthew felt a warmth in his chest. "She's learning to trust me. And you're learning to be a father." "I'm trying. Sometimes I feel like I don't know how to do anything right." "No one does at first," Katie said. "The difference is that you're really trying. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be present." Ruby appeared in the living room in her pajamas, her hair wet. Ready for bed, sweetie? Katie asked. Can I say goodnight to Daddy? Katie nodded. Ruby approached Matthew, still a little shy. Thank you for helping me with my name, she said. You're welcome, Princess. Ruby gave him a quick hug, the first real hug since they met. She smelled like baby soap and chamomile shampoo. See you tomorrow, she said. See you tomorrow. Ruby went to her room with Katie. Matthew could hear them talking softly, Katie probably reading another story before Ruby fell asleep. He got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. On the refrigerator, there was a new drawing from Ruby, a simple house with a family of 3 in front. A blonde woman, a smaller girl, and for the first time, a tall man next to them. Katie came back into the room and found him looking at the drawing. She made it this morning, Katie said, before she went to school. Is that me? She said it was her daddy, the daddy who picks her up from school and tells her stories. Matthew touched the paper carefully. In the drawing, he was smiling, everyone was smiling. Katie, he said, turning to her. I'm learning that she doesn't want a perfect dad. She wants a dad who stays. Katie watched him for a long moment. She needs you, she said finally. The you who is present, not the you who tries to be someone to make up for what you did. And you, Katie sighed. I'm still processing all of this. It still hurts, Matthew. I still remember how hard it was to do everything alone. I know. But she glanced toward the hallway where Ruby was sleeping. I see how happy she is when you arrive. I see how she talks about you, and I see that you're really trying. Katie leaned against the kitchen counter. I haven't forgiven you, she said honestly. It might take a long time for that to happen, or it might never happen. But I'm making space for Ruby, so she can have the father she deserves. Matthew nodded. That's all I can ask for. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep showing up. Keep being present. The rest, we'll see with time. Matthew grabbed his car keys. At the door, he turned one last time. Katie, thank you for letting me learn, for being patient with me. Just don't disappoint me, Matthew. Ruby has been through that once already. I won't disappoint her. Or you. Matthew left the apartment with a heart lighter than it had felt in weeks. In the car, driving back to his empty house, he thought about Ruby practicing writing her name, how she liked stories told softly, how she arranged tomatoes in rows to make it prettier. Little things, simple things, her things. And for the first time, Matthew understood that being a father wasn't about giving expensive gifts or solving every problem. It was about knowing these little things. It was about being there when she needed help writing her name. It was about sitting on the left side of the sofa and speaking softly. It was about staying, and he was going to stay. It was 2:34 in the morning when Matthew's phone rang. He woke up instantly, his heart already pounding before he even answered. Late-night calls were never good news. He grabbed the phone without looking at the caller ID. Hello? Matthew? Katie's voice was tense, worried. Sorry to call so late, but Ruby, she has a very high fever. I need to take her to the hospital. Matthew was already jumping out of bed, fumbling for his clothes in the dark. Which hospital? I'm on my way. Matthew, you don't have to... Which hospital, Katie? She hesitated for a moment. Regional hospital. The emergency room. I'm leaving now. Matthew got dressed in 2 minutes, grabbed his keys, and ran out. On the empty early morning streets, he drove faster than he should, his heart racing. Ruby, his little girl, was sick. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Katie in the emergency room waiting area. She was pale, still in her pajamas under a thrown-on coat, her hair messy. In her arms, she held Ruby wrapped in a blanket. Matthew approached slowly. Ruby was very still, her eyes closed, her breathing heavy. Even from a distance, he could see she was burning with fever. How is she? He asked quietly. Her fever hit 104, Katie answered, her voice trembling. She was a little delirious before we left home. The doctor already examined her, ordered some blood tests. Matthew sat in the chair next to Katie. "Can I?" He held out his arms toward Ruby. Katie hesitated for a second, then carefully transferred Ruby into Matthew's arms. The little girl was burning up, her small body heavy with sleep and illness. "Hey, princess," Matthew murmured, adjusting the blanket around her. Ruby mumbled something inaudible, snuggling closer against his chest. "What did the doctors say?" Matthew asked. "It could be an infection, or just a strong virus. They're going to run tests to be sure." Katie ran a hand through her hair. "She was fine yesterday, ate dinner normally, played, went to bed on time. Then at 2 in the morning, I heard her calling." "Calling?" Katie looked at Matthew, something strange in her expression. She was delirious from the fever, saying things that didn't make sense. And then she said... Katie paused, as if unsure if she should continue. "What? Where's Daddy?" Katie said softly. She kept asking where Daddy was. The words hit Matthew like a punch. He looked down at Ruby in his arms, the little girl who 2 months ago didn't even know he existed. And now, in her fever, in the confusion of her illness, she was looking for him. "Is that why you called me?" Katie nodded. "She was asking for you. I couldn't ignore it." A nurse approached. "Monroe family." "Yes," Katie stood up. "The test results are back. The doctor wants to speak with you." They followed the nurse to a small consultation room. Matthew still carried Ruby, who had fallen asleep in his arms, breathing heavily. The doctor, a woman in her 50s with a kind but concerned expression, looked at them. "The tests show it's a bacterial infection," she said. "Nothing too serious, but she'll need an IV antibiotic. I'm going to admit her for at least 24 hours for monitoring." Katie leaned forward. "Is she going to be okay?" "She'll be fine, but she needs rest and controlled medication. Children this age can have complications if the infection isn't treated properly." Matthew felt Ruby stir in his arms. She opened her eyes slowly, still dull with fever. "Mommy," she murmured. "I'm here, sweetie," Katie said, stroking her daughter's face. Ruby turned her head and saw Matthew. For a moment, she seemed confused, as if she didn't understand why he was there. "Daddy? Hi, princess. How are you feeling?" "Bad," Ruby said in a weak voice. "Everything hurts." "I know. But the doctor is going to give you some medicine to make you feel better." Ruby nodded weakly and closed her eyes again. They moved Ruby to a room on the 2nd floor. It was small but clean, with 2 beds, one for Ruby and a chair that converted into a bed for the person staying with her. While the nurse prepared the IV and antibiotic, Matthew and Katie stood by the bed where Ruby lay. She looked even smaller in the hospital bed, pale against the white sheets. "You can go home," Katie said quietly to Matthew. "I'll stay with her." "No." The answer came automatically, without hesitation. "I'm staying too. Matthew, you have work tomorrow. I have nothing more important than being here." Katie looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." The nurse finished setting up the IV. Ruby moaned softly as the needle went into her vein but didn't fully wake up. "The fever should start to come down in a few hours," the nurse said. "If you need anything, just call." They were left alone in the room. Katie settled into the chair next to the bed. Matthew pulled up another chair and sat on the other side. "You don't have to stay all night," Katie said again. "Yes, I do." Matthew looked at Ruby sleeping. Her face was flushed with fever. Her blonde hair stuck to her forehead with sweat. But her breathing already seemed a little better. "Katie," he said softly, "thank you for calling me. She was asking for you. I couldn't. Even so, thank you." They sat in silence for a while, watching Ruby sleep. The hospital was quiet, just the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway and the occasional beep of some equipment. Around 4 in the morning, Ruby started to stir more. The fever was breaking, but she seemed uncomfortable. "Mommy," she called out softly. "I'm here, sweetie." Ruby opened her eyes, clearer now, less dull. She looked around the room, confused. "Where am I?" "In the hospital," Katie explained. "You had a high fever, remember?" Ruby nodded slowly. Then she saw Matthew sitting in the chair. "You stayed," she said, her voice still weak but surprised. Matthew leaned forward. "And I'm going to keep staying." Ruby gave a small smile, the first one since she got sick. "I'm thirsty." Katie got up to get water, leaving Matthew and Ruby alone for a moment. "Daddy," Ruby said quietly. "Yes? Why did you come?" The question was simple but loaded. Matthew thought about the right answer, the honest answer, because when someone we love is sick, we stay close to take care of them. "You love me." Matthew's heart tightened. "I love you very much." Ruby nodded as if that made sense to her. Katie returned with the glass of water. "Slowly," Katie said, helping Ruby drink. The rest of the early morning passed slowly. Ruby slept in short bursts, waking up when the nurse came to check her temperature or change her medication. Matthew and Katie took turns, one sleeping while the other stayed awake watching. As the sun began to rise, Ruby was visibly better. Her fever had dropped to 99 degrees, and she was able to sit up in bed. "I'm hungry," she announced, and Katie laughed with relief. "That's a good sign," said the doctor who came for the morning rounds. "She can have breakfast. If she has no more fever by this afternoon, you can go home." Ruby ate some toast and drank orange juice. Matthew went to the hospital cafeteria and brought back coffee for himself and Katie. "Thank you," Katie said when he handed her the cup, "for staying, for not leaving. I told you I wouldn't abandon her again." "I know, but it's one thing to say it, another to prove it." Ruby was more energetic now, asking Matthew to tell her a story. He made one up about a brave princess who defeated a wicked fever with the help of magic potions. "Were the potions the medicine?" Ruby asked. "Exactly. And were the doctors wizards, the best wizards in the kingdom?" Ruby laughed, and the sound filled Matthew with relief. In the afternoon, as promised, the doctor discharged Ruby. The fever was completely gone, and she was much more lively. "Remember to take the antibiotic at home for 5 more days," the doctor told Katie. "And if anything comes up, come back." They left the hospital together. Ruby insisted on walking to the car by herself, but Matthew stayed close, ready to catch her if she stumbled. In the car, Ruby sat in the left back seat as always. Matthew drove slowly, being careful with every turn. "Daddy," Ruby said when they were almost home. "Yes? Mommy told me not to look for you because you disappeared when she needed you most." Matthew felt the air get knocked out of him. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw Ruby watching him with those serious blue eyes. Katie was tense in the passenger seat, clearly not expecting Ruby to bring this up. "But last night," Ruby continued, "when I was sick, I wanted you, and you came." Matthew stopped at a red light and turned to look at Ruby. "Ruby," he said, choosing his words carefully, "your mum was right to tell you not to look for me before. I was taught to hide what I feel, to think that work was more important than family. But you taught me how to feel the right way." "How?" "You taught me that it doesn't matter how many expensive cars I have or how much money I make. What matters is being there when the people we love need us." Ruby nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "And you're going to stay forever now." Matthew looked at Katie, who had tears in her eyes. "I'm going to stay forever," he promised. "You can get sick, you can be sad, you can be mad at me, I'll be here. Even if I mess up the R again?" Matthew smiled. "Especially if you mess up the R." Ruby giggled. "Okay." When they got to the apartment, Katie helped Ruby take a bath and put on clean clothes. Matthew stayed in the living room, looking at her drawings scattered on the table. There was a new drawing he hadn't seen before. It was him, Katie, and Ruby at the hospital. Even with simple childlike strokes, you could see it was the 3 of them together, taking care of each other. "She drew that yesterday morning," Katie said, coming into the living room, "before she got sick." As if she knew you would all need to be together. Matthew touched the paper carefully. Can she saved me, Katie? What do you mean? She taught me that being a father isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. It's about staying, even when it gets hard. Katie sat next to him on the sofa. Last night, when she was delirious, do you know what else she said? What? That she wanted you to tell her a story. That the hospital was scarier without a story. Matthew felt his eyes well up with tears. She trusts me. She does. And I'm starting to trust you, too. Ruby appeared in the living room, still a little pale but smiling. Can I sit on the left side of the sofa? She asked. Of course, Matthew said. Ruby settled into her favorite corner and looked at him expectantly. Story? What story do you want to hear? Ruby thought for a moment. The story of the daddy who learned to stay. Matthew looked at Katie, who nodded encouragingly. Once upon a time, Matthew began, speaking softly as Ruby liked, there was a man who thought working was more important than loving. Until one day, a very brave little girl appeared in his life and taught him that true love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. Ruby snuggled deeper into the sofa, her eyes shining. And did the man learn? He learned. And when the little girl got sick, he discovered that there was nowhere in the world he would rather be than taking care of her. And they stayed together forever. Matthew looked at Katie, then at Ruby. They stayed together forever. Ruby smiled and closed her eyes, finally relaxing completely. Matthew continued the story until she fell asleep, his low voice filling the room with words of love and permanence. For the first time, Matthew fully understood what it meant to be a father. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about staying. The offer arrived on a Wednesday by email. Matthew was in his office reviewing reports when Sarah came in with an expression he knew well. It was the expression she made when something very important was happening. Mr. Reynolds, an offer came in from Nakamura Industries, from Japan. Matthew looked at the clock, 2:30 p.m. In half an hour, he needed to leave to pick up Ruby from school. He was excited to see her. Yesterday, she had promised to show him a new drawing she was making for him. Can you summarize? They want a full merger. Nakamura Reynolds International. You would be the global CEO, based in Tokyo. Matthew stopped reading the report. How full? Full. They buy 60% of Reynolds Tech. You keep 40%, but of the entire conglomerate. The value, Sarah swallowed hard, $200 million. For you, personally. The world stopped. 200 million. It was the dream Matthew had chased for 15 years. Absolute success, international recognition, the chance to transform his regional company into a global giant. When do they want an answer? By Monday. And Mr. Reynolds? They want a meeting in Tokyo tomorrow. Matthew looked at the clock again, 2:35 p.m. Ruby was waiting. Tell them I can't travel tomorrow. Sarah blinked, surprised. Sir, I can't travel. I have commitments here. But Mr. Reynolds, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. 200 million. I understand the value, Sarah. But I can't travel. Sarah looked confused but nodded. I'll talk to them. Maybe they can reschedule. Matthew left the office and went to pick up Ruby. The entire way to the school, his mind was racing. 200 million, global CEO, the pinnacle of his career. But when he saw Ruby running towards him, smiling and waving, the numbers vanished from his head. Daddy, Daddy, I finished the drawing. What drawing? The one I told you about yesterday. Want to see? In the car, Ruby took a colorful drawing from her backpack. It was a big house with a garden in front. 3 people were at the door. A blonde woman, a smaller girl, and a tall man. It's us, Ruby explained. In the new house. What new house? The one you're going to buy for us. Mommy said you have money to buy a big house, with a garden for me to play in. Matthew felt a tightness in his chest. Your mom said that. She said rich families live in big houses, And now we're a rich family because you're my daddy." The rest of the drive home was silent. Matthew was lost in thought. 200 million big house and garden family. But Tokyo was a 16-hour flight away. That night, after dropping Ruby off, Matthew called his lawyer, his accountant, and 2 business consultants. They all said the same thing. It was the opportunity of a lifetime he couldn't refuse. Matthew stayed up all night, looking at reports, doing calculations, researching Nakamura Industries. On Thursday, he didn't pick up Ruby. Sarah called at 3:30 p.m. "Mr. Reynolds, the school is calling. Ruby is waiting at the gate." Matthew looked at the computer full of spreadsheets. "Tell Katie to get her." "I'm busy. But sir, you always—" "Not today." Matthew hung up the phone and went back to the numbers. 200 million. It was enough money to give Ruby the best education in the world, the best opportunities, the best of everything. On Friday, he did the same thing, didn't pick up Ruby, didn't call. He stayed locked in his office studying the proposal. On Saturday, he turned off his phone. He needed to think, he needed to decide, and for that he needed silence, distance. Matthew spent the weekend locked in his house, surrounded by documents. The proposal was tempting, more than tempting. It was the realization of everything he had ever dreamed of. But it meant moving to Japan. It meant constant travel. It meant going back to being the man who put work above all else. It meant leaving Ruby. On Monday, the phone rang at 8 a.m. It was Katie. "Matthew, where are you?" Her voice was tense, worried. "At home. Why?" "Ruby was waiting for you at school on Thursday and Friday. Where were you?" Matthew ran a hand through his hair. "I'm busy." "A business opportunity came up." "What kind of opportunity?" Matthew hesitated. "A merger. International. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Katie, it's work. You wouldn't understand." Silence on the other end of the line. "Ruby asked if you were going to abandon her again," Katie said finally. The words were like a punch. "I didn't abandon her. I'm just busy." For 3 days, Matthew. 3 days without a word, without picking her up from school, without calling. How is that not abandonment? Matthew didn't know what to say. "She drew a house for you all," Katie continued. "A family. And you disappeared without an explanation." "I didn't disappear. I'm here. Physically, maybe, but emotionally." "Where are you, Matthew?" Katie hung up. Matthew stared at the phone, then at the documents scattered across the table. $200 million. The whole world ahead of him. But what kind of world would that be without Ruby running towards him after school, without the stories in the left back seat, without the drawings on the fridge? On Tuesday, Matthew woke up knowing what he had to do. At 2:45 p.m. he was at the school gate. Ruby ran out as always, but stopped when she saw him. There was something different in her eyes. Caution, fear. "Hi, princess." "Hi," Ruby replied quietly, not running to hug him as she had been doing lately. In the car, she sat in the left back seat in silence. She didn't ask for a story. She didn't show him any drawings. She just looked out the window. "Ruby," Matthew said at the first light. "I'm sorry. I've been absent these past few days." Ruby didn't answer. "I received a job offer, a very big one, and I needed to think." "Are you going to take it?" Ruby asked without looking at him. I don't know yet. Is it far away?" Matthew swallowed hard. "It is." Ruby nodded, as if she already knew the answer. "Are you going to abandon me like before?" The question pierced his heart. "No, Ruby. I will never abandon you again." "But you disappeared." "For 3 days." "I know. It was wrong." Ruby finally looked at him in the rearview mirror. As Mommy cried, Matthew felt his world crumble. She cried, "On Friday night, she thought you had left again, like when I was a baby." Matthew pulled the car over to the side of the road. He turned to look Ruby in the eyes. "Ruby, listen to me. I made a mistake. A big mistake. but I am not going to abandon you. Never again. Promise. I promise. Ruby studied him for a long moment. Then why did you disappear? Matthew took a deep breath. Because I needed to think about what's most important in my life. And now I know what I want most is here. Here where? Here with you. With your mum. This life we're building together. Ruby gave a small smile. Fair, you're not going to take the job far away? I'm not going to take it, even if it's a lot of money. Matthew chuckled softly. Even if it's a lot of money, you know why? Why? Because money doesn't draw a new house for the family. Money doesn't sit in the left back seat to listen to a story. Money doesn't make me want to be a better person every day. Ruby unbuckled her seatbelt and threw herself forward, hugging Matthew from behind the seat. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Princess. More than 200 million. How much is 200 million? A lot of money, but it's not worth even one of your hugs. Ruby laughed. Can I tell Mommy you came back? You can. And that you're not going to disappear anymore. And that I'm not going to disappear anymore. When they arrived at the apartment, Katie was waiting at the door. Matthew could see the relief on her face when she saw Ruby smiling. Mommy! Ruby shouted, running into Katie's arms. Daddy's back! And he's not going to take the job far away. Katie looked at Matthew over Ruby's head. Is it true? It's true, Matthew said. I needed to think. Now I know. What I want most is here. Katie nodded, her eyes moist. And the money. What money? Matthew said, picking Ruby up. I'm the richest man in the world. I have you too. Ruby laughed and kissed his cheek. Are you going to tell a story today? I'm going to tell a story every day, forever. Promise. Matthew looked at Katie, then at Ruby. I promise. I learned something these last 3 days. It doesn't matter how much money I have or how many companies I build. If I don't have you two, I have nothing. The following Monday, Matthew sent a polite email to Nakamura Industries declining the offer. Sarah thought he had gone insane. Matthew thought he had finally found his sanity. At 3 p.m., he was at the school gate waiting for Ruby, and he would be there every day for the rest of his life. The registry office was an old building downtown, with walls yellowed by time and the characteristic smell of old paper. Matthew held Ruby's small hand as they waited in line, the documents organized in a brown leather folder. Why did we come here again? Ruby asked for the 3rd time, swinging her legs on the uncomfortable plastic chair. To put my name on your official document, Matthew explained patiently, so that officially, on paper, I am recognized as your father. But aren't you already my dad? Matthew smiled, stroking her blonde hair. I am your dad in my heart, in love, in practice. But now it will be officially written, for everyone to know. So no one can ever question it. Ruby nodded seriously, as if she finally understood the importance of the moment. Katie sat beside them, nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap. Matthew knew this wasn't easy for her. For 6 years, she had been a single mother, making all the decisions alone. Now she was officially sharing that responsibility. Her Monroe Reynolds family? The clerk called out, a middle-aged woman with glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. They stood up. Ruby immediately corrected her with pride. It's Ruby Reynolds now. Ruby Reynolds Monroe. The woman smiled tenderly. What a beautiful and full name, dear. The process was simpler than Matthew had imagined, but infinitely more emotional. He signed documents with careful handwriting, solemnly declared that he recognized Ruby as his biological daughter, and promised to care for her, protect her, and love her unconditionally. When they received the new birth certificate, Ruby read it aloud, spelling out the more complex words. Ruby Reynolds Monroe? She pronounced each syllable with care. She looked up at Matthew with her blue eyes shining. I have 2 last names now. You do. Your mum's, which you've always carried, and mine, which is now rightfully yours too. I'm Ruby Reynolds Monroe. She repeated her full name, trying out how it sounded. On their way out of the registry office, Ruby tugged on the sleeve of Matthew's jacket. "Now you're my dad. In everything." Matthew knelt on the sidewalk to be at her eye level. "In absolutely everything, princess, on paper, in my heart, before the law, forever." Ruby beamed and threw herself into his arms. 3 weeks later, Matthew parked his BMW in front of a small house on a quiet residential street. It was an old neighborhood, with century-old trees forming a green canopy over the street, and wide sidewalks where children could play safely. "Why did we stop here?" Katie asked, looking at the property. "So I want to show you something special." The house had 2 floors, a cozy front porch with rocking chairs, and a backyard that could be seen through the white-painted wooden fence. It was painted a light blue, almost lavender, with white windows and a red door that gave a cheerful touch to the whole look. "It's very pretty," Ruby said, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Whose is it?" "Ours," Matthew replied, watching Katie's reaction. Katie turned to him, her eyes wide. "Ours how?" "I bought it for you, for the 3 of us." Matthew took the keys out of his pocket, a set on a blue ribbon. "If you want it, of course. If you don't like it, I can look for another one." Katie was silent, looking at the house as if she couldn't believe it. Ruby was already out of the car and trying to peek into the garden. "Matthew," Katie began. "It's not about the money," he said quickly. "It's not to impress you, it's because you deserve your own place. A safe home, with a garden for Ruby to play in and for you to have your own little corner." "Is there a swing?" Ruby shouted from the back. "There is," Matthew answered, "and a treehouse." Katie walked up to the front fence. "You didn't ask me first." "I know, I should have." Matthew joined her. "But when I saw this house, I thought of you. I thought of Ruby drawing in the garden. I thought of you reading on the porch. I thought of us being a real family." Katie ran her hand over the wooden door. "Can I see inside?" Matthew opened the door carefully. The house had a large living room with a fireplace, a spacious kitchen with a central island, and windows overlooking the garden, 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, and a small office. It was simple, but thoughtfully designed. The walls were white, the large windows letting natural light flood every room. Ruby ran through the rooms like a joyful hurricane, exploring every corner, opening cabinets, running up and down the stairs. "Can this be my room?" she asked, standing in the doorway of the smallest bedroom. "If you want it, or you can choose another one." "I like this one." Ruby went inside and spun in the center. "It has a big window to the garden. I can see the flowers from here." Katie went up slowly, observing every detail. The master bedroom had a small balcony overlooking the street. The bathroom had a restored antique bathtub. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "Truly beautiful." "Do you want to live here?" Matthew asked, trying not to show how much her answer mattered. Katie looked out the window, saw Ruby in the garden, imagining where to plant flowers. "I need to think. It's a big decision. All the time you need. No rush." Ruby had already decided. "I do. Can I have a little table for drawing in the garden and plant cherry tomatoes?" "You can have whatever you want, princess." They moved in the following month. Matthew helped carry boxes, assemble furniture, and organize Ruby's books on the new custom-made bookshelf he'd had built. Katie insisted on paying for part of the expenses, her way of maintaining her independence. "I can help with the household bills," she said. "I don't want to feel dependent. I want it to be our house." Matthew understood. It was important for Katie to contribute, to feel that she was building this life with him. Ruby adapted quickly. She chose where to put each toy, organized her colored pencils on her nightstand, and hung her drawings on the bedroom walls. Matthew began to participate in the family routine in a way he had never experienced before. In the morning, he would take Ruby to school after they had breakfast together. He learned that she liked her orange juice warm, never cold, that she preferred her blue sneakers on Mondays because blue is a beginning color, and pink ones on Fridays because pink is a party color, that she always forgot to comb her own hair. "Daddy, "Can you do my braid?" she asked one morning. Matthew looked at Katie, who was preparing her lunch. "I don't know how to do a braid." "I'll teach you," Katie offered. For a week, Katie patiently taught Matthew. His hands were clumsy at first, pulling too tight or leaving it too loose, but Ruby was patient. "Slower," she would say gently. In the second week, Matthew managed to make a decent braid. "It's perfect," Ruby exclaimed, admiring herself in the mirror. "Just like the ones Mommy makes." "It looks really good," Katie agreed, and Matthew saw pride in her eyes. In the afternoon, he would help Ruby with her homework at the kitchen table. He discovered she was good at math but still had trouble with some letters. The R remained a challenge. "Let's practice," he would say, getting a blank piece of paper. They would spend half an hour each day practicing the difficult letters. Matthew had bought special notebooks with lines that helped Ruby write in the right size. "See, it's getting better every day," he would always say. At night, after dinner, Matthew would read stories to Ruby on the sofa. He found out she liked adventures, but not too scary, that she preferred when he made different voices for the characters, that she always asked for just one more when he finished. "Please, just one more short one," she would negotiate. "Okay, just one more." But it was never really short. On Saturdays, they would work in the garden together. They planted lavender flowers, set up a corner with a small table where she could draw outdoors. "Can I plant tomatoes?" she asked one Saturday. "Of course." "Why?" "To make salad like Mommy does." They planted cherry tomatoes in a planter box. Ruby watered them every day, checking their growth. "No tomatoes yet," she would announce in the mornings. On Sundays, they had a slower routine. Matthew would make pancakes, the only thing he knew how to cook properly. Katie would prepare coffee and read the newspaper. Ruby would draw or play in the garden. It was simple. It was ordinary. It was exactly what Matthew never knew he wanted. One Sunday, 5 months after the move, Matthew was packing Ruby's backpack when Katie approached. "Matthew," she said softly, "can I talk to you?" Ruby was in the garden playing. They could see her through the window, much always. Katie made tea, something she did for serious conversations. "I've been noticing some things," she said, handing him a cup. "What?" "You met Ruby, how you two interact." Matthew waited, not knowing if it was good or bad. "You've changed completely," Katie said after a sip. "For real?" "I hope so." "Ruby loves you unconditionally, without reservation." Katie stirred her tea. "And I see how you take care of her. How you're genuinely present, not just physically, but emotionally." "It's where I want to be," Katie nodded. "I know. That's why I need to tell you something." Matthew leaned forward. "I still haven't completely forgiven you," Katie said honestly. "It still hurts. I still wonder what if sometimes. I still feel angry that I went through it all alone." Matthew looked down. "I understand. But," Katie continued, her voice softer, "I see you every day making a real effort. I see you choosing family over work. I see you learning to be a father, messing up sometimes, but always trying to get it right. I still mess up a lot. Every father messes up. Every mother messes up. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying every day to be better." They sat in silence, watching Ruby in the garden. "Matthew," Katie said finally, "I can't erase what you did, but I want to start over differently." Matthew looked up. "How?" "As a real family, not as two people raising a child separately. As people building something together." Matthew's heart sped up. "What are you saying?" "That I haven't forgotten, but maybe we can move forward. Together." Matthew looked at Katie, really looked. He saw the woman he had loved at 20. He saw the mother who had raised Ruby alone. He saw the brave person willing to give a second chance. "Katie," he said softly, "I love you, I always have, even when I was too stupid to realize it." "I know," she replied. "I love you too. That's why it hurts so much." "And now?" Katie smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Now we'll see what we can build, slowly, with patience." Ruby ran in at that moment. "What are you guys doing?" she asked, noticing the teacups. "Mahani talking about important things," Katie answered. "About what?" Matthew and Katie looked at each other, smiling. "About how we're a family now," Matthew said. Ruby nodded, as if it were obvious. "I already knew that." "You did?" "Of course. Families have breakfast together. Families share a house. Families take care of each other." Ruby grabbed a cookie. "You guys do all those things?" Katie laughed. "You're right." "Can I plant more flowers tomorrow?" Ruby asked, already losing interest. "You can plant as many as you want," Matthew answered. Ruby ran back out to the garden. Matthew and Katie stayed in the kitchen, finishing their tea in a comfortable silence. It was the silence of people learning to trust again, to build again. Through the window, they watched Ruby playing in the garden that Matthew had chosen for her, the house he had bought imagining a family, the life they were building together, brick by brick. The love was there, not the dramatic love of their 20s, but something deeper, stronger because it had been tested. Built with patience and sustained by conscious choice. It was quiet, it was steady, it was real. It was the kind of love that lasted, the kind of love a family needed to flourish.